Before we get into the darkness, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. The stories we tell here aren't for the faint of heart, and you won't want to miss what comes next. The first light of dawn on October 17th was a pale gray smear over the flat, endless fields of Vandalia, Illinois. It was a time of day when the world felt still and silent, broken only by the distant rumble of a semi-truck on I-70. But on this morning, that silence was shattered. A county worker checking a drainage ditch off a gravel service road saw a splash of color that didn't belong. A flutter of pink fabric against the mud-brown earth. As he drew closer, the shape resolved into a nightmare. It was the body of a young girl, discarded like trash. She was 14-year-old Lila Evans, a freshman with a shy smile, last seen alive just 12 hours earlier. The scene was one of profound violation. The initial responding officers, hardened men who thought they'd seen everything, had to look away. Lila had been sexually assaulted, but the cause of death was something that would haunt the dreams of every investigator on the scene. Blunt force trauma, delivered with such savagery that the weapon was left embedded in the wounds. A pair of common red-handled jumper cables. They weren't just a tool of murder, they were a message of pure, unadulterated hatred. Detective Mark Rinaldi stood over the scene, the taste of cold coffee and rage in his mouth. The sheer brutality was a shockwave. Who does this to a child? His partner, Detective Ava Torres, whispered, her breath misting in the chill air. The investigation ignited with a frantic, furious energy. Lila was a good kid, a solid student, from a stable home. There were no dark secrets in her life, no reason for her to be a target. This was random, or it was a predator so skilled he left no obvious trail. The first break came from a traffic camera on the edge of town. It captured a fleeting glimpse of Lila the previous evening, talking to the driver of a beat-up dark blue Ford pickup truck. The image was grainy, the license plate unreadable, but it was a thread. They pulled every record for that make and model in a 50-mile radius. One name kept floating to the top, a name that was a familiar nuisance to the Vandalia PD. Carl Jepson. Jepson was a ghost of the Rust Belt, a 38-year-old mechanic with a rap sheet that was a chronicle of escalating violence. It started with bar fights and DUIs, then morphed into aggravated assault, possession of a deadly weapon, and a string of domestic battery charges that always seemed to get pled down. He was a storm cloud of a man, constantly on the periphery of trouble. His blue Ford pickup truck was a perfect match. When a patrol car quietly rolled past his dilapidated single-wide trailer on the outskirts of town, the truck was there, and it was spotlessly clean, freshly washed, in stark contrast to the grime and oil of the surrounding yard. Rinaldi and Torres brought him in for questioning. He was calm, too calm. He had an answer for everything. Yes, he'd given Lila a ride, he said. She looked lost, he said. He was just being a good Samaritan. He dropped her off a block from her house, and that was the last he saw of her. His alibi for the night was a solitary one. He was home, working on his truck. He didn't flinch when they mentioned the jumper cables. Every mechanic's got a pair, he shrugged, his eyes flat and empty. They had nothing to hold him on. No forensic evidence had come back from the lab yet. They had a gut feeling that screamed his guilt, but gut feelings don't get convictions. They had to let him go. The case was stalling. The community was paralyzed with fear. Then, the phone rang in the evidence lab. The lead forensic technician's voice was tight with urgency. They had processed the jumper cables, and the results were back. Rinaldi held his breath, expecting to hear Jepson's name. But the technician said something that turned the entire investigation on its head. He said, "We found DNA, but it's a mixed profile. There is the victim's blood, of course, and there's a second contributor, a male, But it's not a match for Carl Jepsen. The air left the room. They had been so sure. Rinaldi looked at Torres, her face a mirror of his own shock. If Jepsen wasn't their guy, then a brutal, calculating killer was still out there, and he just walked out of their interrogation room a free man. The revelation that the DNA on the murder weapon didn't belong to Carl Jepsen was a sucker punch to the investigation. Detective Rinaldi felt the solid ground of the case crumble beneath him. They had been so certain, so focused on the obvious monster, that they had potentially missed the real one. The immediate terrifying question was, whose DNA was on those jumper cables? The lab was working to run it through CODIS, the national database, but that took time. And time was a luxury they no longer had, not with a killer walking free and knowing the police were circling.
Rinaldi and Torres made the difficult decision to pull back from Jepsen and widen the net. They re-interviewed Lila's friends, her teachers, her family, searching for any other thread to pull. It was during a second, more painful conversation with Lila's mother, Sarah Evans, that a new, chilling detail emerged. Through her tears, Sarah mentioned that a few weeks before her death, Lila had been upset about a man who kept hanging around the park near her school. He wasn't a student, wasn't a parent. He just sat in his car, watching. Sarah had brushed it off at the time, thinking it was just a creepy guy, one of the many small dangers you warn your daughters about. But now, the memory was horrifying. She couldn't give a good description of the man or his car, only a vague impression of a dark sedan. This sent a new wave of dread through the task force. Were they looking at a stalker? A predator who had been hunting Lila? The focus shifted to the park. They pulled all available traffic and security camera footage from the surrounding area for the past month. It was a digital haystack, and they were searching for a single sinister needle. Meanwhile, the pressure from the public and the media was intensifying. The story of the murdered girl in the jumper cables was now national news, and the Vandalia Police Department was facing accusations of incompetence for letting their prime suspect walk. It was then that Carl Jepsen did something unexpected. He called Detective Torres. His voice, once so arrogantly calm, was now edged with a raw, panicked energy. "You have to believe me," he insisted. "I lied. I didn't just give her a ride that night. She was scared. She asked me for help." According to Jepsen's new story, Lila had confided in him that she was being followed by someone she knew, someone she was afraid of. She wouldn't give a name, only that it was a man who had a clean, nice car. Jepsen, the perennial outcast, claimed he felt a surge of protectiveness. He agreed to meet her later that night to talk about it, to see if he could help. But when he arrived at the meeting spot, she wasn't there. He claimed he drove around, found nothing, and went home. He lied initially because he knew how it looked. A man with his record meeting a teenage girl in secret. It was a convenient story, one designed to make him look like a misguided hero. Rinaldi was deeply skeptical. But one detail stuck out, a detail that hadn't been released to the public. The killer likely used a second vehicle. The forensics on the gravel near Lila's body indicated the presence of a different tire tread, not a pickup truck. Jepsen's mention of a clean, nice car sent a jolt through the room. Was he telling the truth? Or was this a sick killer toying with them, weaving himself into the narrative? The answer came in a frantic call from the evidence lab. The mixed DNA profile had been successfully separated. The primary male contributor on the jumper cables had been identified. The technician's voice was hushed, disbelieving. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "We got a hit in CODIS. The DNA belongs to Ryan Evans." Rinaldi's blood ran cold. Ryan Evans, Lila's uncle, her father's brother. The man who had stood weeping at the family press conference, his arm wrapped around a grieving Sarah Evans. The man who had been in and out of the police station daily, bringing coffee and donuts to the detectives, begging for any news on who had taken his beloved niece. He was there, in the very heart of their investigation, a wolf in grieving sheep's clothing. The name Ryan Evans echoed in the silence of the investigation room, a bomb disguised as a syllable. Detective Rinaldi felt the world tilt on its axis. Ryan Evans, the supportive uncle, the grieving family spokesman, the man who looked each of them in the eye, his own red-rimmed and full of tears, and pleaded for justice for his niece. It was a betrayal so deep it felt like a physical blow. The entire investigation had been a performance, and they had all been his audience, while the killer sat in the front row. Every interaction was now reframed in this horrifying new light. Ryan's constant presence at the station, his offers of help, his questions about the evidence. It wasn't grief, it was surveillance. He was monitoring their every move, feeding them just enough false sympathy to stay above suspicion, all while steering them toward Carl Jepsen, the perfect patsy. The clean, nice car Jepsen mentioned? Ryan drove a spotless, dark gray sedan. The tire treads at the scene were a match. The puzzle pieces, once scattered and chaotic, now slammed together with terrifying logical precision. They moved quickly, silently. There was no time for a tactical team. The risk of Ryan realizing the net was closing was too great. Rinaldi and Torres drove to the Evans family home, a place that had once been a sanctuary of grief and was now the lion's den. Sarah Evans answered the door, her face hollow with exhaustion. Ryan was right behind her in the living room, a comforting hand on her shoulder. The sight of it made Rinaldi's skin crawl. The confrontation was quiet, deliberate. "Ryan, we need you to come down to the station," Rinaldi said, his voice a low, steady force. "We have some new questions about the night Lila disappeared." Ryan's mask was perfect. He looked confused, then concerned, the model of a cooperative citizen. "Of course, anything to help," he said, grabbing his jacket. It was only as they stepped onto the porch, away from Sarah's hearing, that Rinaldi played his hand. "We found your DNA, Ryan, on the jumper cables."
The concerned uncle vanished, and in his place stood a man whose eyes glinted with a cold, flat hatred. He didn't confess. He didn't break down. He simply smiled, a thin, cruel twist of his lips. "You have no idea what she was," he whispered, his voice dripping with a venom that froze the air. That little slut was gonna ruin everything. The motive, when it finally emerged from financial records and secret text messages pulled from a hidden phone, was as mundane as it was monstrous. Ryan, secretly drowning in gambling debt, had stolen money from his brother's savings, money earmarked for Lila's college fund. Lila, a sharp, observant girl, had stumbled upon the transactions on a shared family computer. She had confronted him, threatening to tell her father. For Ryan, it wasn't just about the money. It was about the exposure, the shattering of his image as the successful, dependable brother. The assault was an act of brutal punishment. The murder, with a tool from his own car, was a cold, calculated decision to silence her forever. He then used Carl Jepsen's history and his own position within the family to construct a perfect shield, manipulating everyone's grief to hide his own evil. Ryan Evans was convicted of first-degree murder and sexual assault and sentenced to life in prison without parole. There was no justice, only a void where a family used to be. Carl Jepsen, a flawed and troubled man, was ultimately an unwitting pawn in a killer's game, his life nearly destroyed by the real monster. The story ends not with a bang, but with a haunting, unbearable silence. The killer was caught, the case was closed, but the truth was a poison that lingered. It forces a terrifying question into the minds of everyone who hears it. If the monster isn't the one lurking in the shadows with a record of violence, but the one sitting in your living room offering a shoulder to cry on, then who can you ever truly trust? This is a darkness that doesn't fade when the cell door clangs shut. It lingers, it whispers, and if this story has you questioning the very people around you, then you understand why we tell these stories. To see the darkness, so we can recognize it before it's too late. If you made it to the end of this nightmare, you're stronger than most. But the next story, the next one will test that strength. Hit subscribe, because you're not ready for what's coming next.